As is often quoted, there are three kinds of people in the world. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and there are those who ask, what happens? Which one are you? We've been making our way through the book of Nehemiah, and we would place Nehemiah in the first category of people, one who wanted to make things happen. He didn't just watch things happen, and he didn't stand around and then ask, what happens? He was a doer. He not only saw the problem, he wanted to do something about the problem. And as we'll see this morning, Nehemiah, in engineer-type fashion, will conduct this feasibility study of the walls before moving into action. Now, I'm calling this sermon series, Living Life on Purpose. Living life on purpose. You see, we can live this life or it will just live us. We can be in this world to do something or just for something to do. Nehemiah was a man who lived on purpose. He was a man with a mission. And it isn't just any mission, it is a mission from God. And so turn your Bibles with me to Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah chapter 2. We left off last week with Nehemiah facing his fears and going to the king with a bold request. He had prayed about this over a 4-month period, and God answered his impossible prayer. You see, the people of God were under Persian rule. Their city was in ruins. Their place of worship was reduced to rubble. People were very vulnerable, and they were unprotected with their walls being torn down. And their first attempt at rebuilding was stopped by the same king that Nehemiah worked for. So would the king reverse a hard and fast decision? As Nehemiah and going to him and asking for permission for this leave of absence, is he going to tick the king off? Well, he needed to go rebuild the walls, and he went as cupbearer, and he made this request because Nehemiah had to do something. He had to do something. He dared to ask. He knew that if God was not in this, he would fall flat on his face. Worse than that, he'd have no face because his head would have been cut off. Let me ask you a question. What are you trusting God for that is so unbelievable in its magnitude that when it happens, it will be obvious that only God did it? As a church, what are we trusting God for that is so unbelievable in its magnitude that when it happens, it will be obvious that only God did it? Well, it's obvious that God did the impossible for Nehemiah. For Nehemiah says, and because the gracious hand of God was upon me, the king granted my request. And so with the right kind of documentation in hand, and with the king's blessing, Nehemiah travels to Jerusalem. And since it was roughly 800 to 1,000 miles from Susa, where Nehemiah served as cupbearer, to Jerusalem, it would have taken several months for him to have made that trip. But you have to wonder, at least I do, as Nehemiah is making this journey, this long trip from Susa to Jerusalem, what might be going through his mind? I mean, he might think, do the people even want me there? Would they have the same vision I have? Will they even listen to me when I get there? Will some people make it difficult for me to do my job? Will I have some enemies? I mean, all kinds of things had to be rolling around in his mind. Well, Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, it tells us in verse 11 of Nehemiah chapter 2. Now, there are 5 words that are going to help us pull things together today. 5 words. And the first word is relaxation. Relaxation. So after months of praying and planning, after getting the king's permission to get this leave of absence, after a couple of months or so of traveling and journeying, he arrives at his destination. He arrives at the city of ruins. And what does Nehemiah do? Well, follow along with me. Verse 11 of Nehemiah chapter 2, Nehemiah says here, these kind of journal entries here that we see. He says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. Now, we might just kind of pass over this verse without any thought. Well, I'm not going to let you do that, because we might kind of see this as unimportant. No, I believe there's something very significant here about the phrase, after staying there 3 days. I mean, there was a ton of work to do. The city is an absolute mess. It's been several months now from the time when Nehemiah first heard the news, and after much waiting, he prays for several months, and he finally arrives in Jerusalem, and what does he do? He takes a 3-day weekend. This guy, no doubt, as I said last week, would drive some people absolutely nuts, especially type A people. Come on, Nehemiah. We have a job to do. We didn't travel all this way for you to take 3 days off. Come on, let's get going. Now, Nehemiah is a man of action. He's a get-it-done type guy. We're going to see that throughout this book. No doubt he wanted to get on with this project, but what does he do? This is significant. He rests. He rests. We see the same thing in Ezra chapter 8, verse 32, of the other returnees, when they arrived at Jerusalem, it says, we arrived in Jerusalem where we rested for 3 days. Now, the American way is to run from activity to activity to activity to activity without stopping. That's my life a lot. I'm not proud to say that, but it is. Well, I mean, we are a nation that doesn't Sabbath very well. We're always working. We're always plugged in. We're always on the move. We're running like chickens with our heads cut off. And the scary thing is, we think it's spiritual to do so. How you doing? Busy. Badge of honor. I remember as a new pastor in a church that the leaders, in a rather prideful way, they were the deacons kind of serving as elders. And they would say to me, you know, before you came, Pastor, our meetings would go until midnight, as if I was to be impressed. That's a good thing? Let me ask you a question. How well do you function when you're tired? Can you make sound judgments and sensible decisions when you're tired? Now let me get real practical here. When you're tired, listen, when you're tired, it is no time to quit your job. It's no time to quit school. When you're tired, it's no time to quit anything. Don't do it then. When you're tired, it's no time to assess your spiritual condition. It's no time when you're tired to make a huge decision. When you're tired, that is not the time to write that confrontational email or letter that you want to send off. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Not when you're tired. Sit on it. I mean, how sharp are you when you're tired? A man approached a foreman of a logging crew and asked him for a job. And the foreman said, well, it depends. Let's see you take this tree down. Well, the young man stepped forward. He took his axe and he skillfully felled a great tree. So the foreman was so impressed, he said, you know, you can start first thing on Monday morning. On Monday morning, the young man showed up. He begins to work using his axe to chop down trees. He's going at it. Tuesday, he's doing a great job. And Wednesday rolls on. And then by Thursday afternoon, the foreman approaches the young man and he says, you know, you can pick up your check at the end of the day. We're letting you go because you're falling behind. But I'm a hard worker, the young man objected. I arrive first, I leave last, and I've even worked through my coffee breaks. And the foreman asked, well, have you been sharpening your axe? Well, sir, no, I've been working too hard to take the time. That's convicting. That is incredibly convicting. Are you taking time? Are you taking time for sharpening? Are you taking time for refocusing? Are you downplaying rest? Because rest keeps us sharp. Now, that's not an excuse to put off doing what you know you should be doing. Like the one who jokes, I like work, it fascinates me. I can sit and look at work for hours. No, that's not what we're talking about. For Nehemiah, after this long journey, relaxation was needed. He rests for 3 days. Nehemiah's prayed up, he's rested up. We come to the second word, motivation. Motivation. What makes you tick? I love trying to figure that out with people. What makes them tick? I mean, what drives them to do what they do? Because I believe that behind every behavior is a motivation for doing it. Both good behaviors as well as wrong behaviors. You got to get to the motivation. Sometimes we just work on the behavior piece, but there's a motivation for doing it in the first place, good and bad. Well, what makes Nehemiah tick? I mean, Nehemiah, why are you doing this? Why in the world would Nehemiah leave his secure job in Susa to go to Jerusalem? Why would he leave the comforts of the palace life to put himself in harm's way? Why did he concern himself with people 800 miles away? Why? Why is he doing this? Did he do this because he just loved to travel? Did he do this simply for something to do? Did he do it because he was trying to find himself, this midlife crisis sort of thing? I mean, was it because he wanted to make a name for himself? Is that why he's doing it? Well, Nehemiah removes any doubt of his motivation. The key verse, I believe, that drives everything in this book is found in verse 12. It's really why I come up with the theme, living life on purpose. It's all right here in verse 12. It says here, look at verse 12. I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. Now again, we could pass right over that. I want to slow down a little bit because I want us to catch that phrase there. What my God had put in my heart to do. Why did Nehemiah travel to Jerusalem? God put it in his heart to do it. Why did Hudson Taylor give 51 years of just learning the Chinese culture and learning the Chinese dialects? Because God had put it in his heart to bring Christ behind the closed doors of China. Why would a woman suffering from neuralgia, confined to bed for weeks at a time, spend 55 years in India, and I even told without a furlough, whether I agree with that or not, but that's what she was committed to. Why? Because God had put it in Amy Carmichael's heart to end child prostitution and provide a home for orphans. Why would 29-year-old Jim Elliott go to the thick jungle of Ecuador and set up camp in a dangerous and uncivilized Indian tribe to only die there? Because God had put it in his heart to tell the Aucas about Jesus. Why would a follower of Christ stop to help someone shovel his driveway? Why would a follower of Christ provide a meal for the neighbor who just lost a loved one? Why would someone take the time, a believer in Christ, take the time to pray with a struggling grandmother? Why? Why would a person standing in line pay for the person's groceries in front of them? Because God had put it in their heart to show the love of Jesus Christ. What is it that God has put in your heart to do? What has he put in your heart to do? And if he's called you and he's put in your heart to do it, is there any reasons why you're not doing it right now? Have you become distracted from what God's put in your heart to do? I must wrestle with that. See, we're busy people. We have far more to do any day, every day, all day than we can possibly get done. But will we stop long enough to discern what it is that God has put in our heart to do? call it vision, call it burden, call it a mission statement, call it your God-given purpose. I don't care what you call it, because whatever you call it, you will know it by the passion that burns within you. Last year, Nicole and I were given tickets to a Patriots game. And not only was it Nicole's first time at a Patriots game, but my first experience as well. I mean, I'd been to many Bruins games and Red Sox games and Celtics games growing up in Massachusetts and as an adult. But I've never seen anything like what I saw in Foxborough. Totally different experience. You stand up pretty much the whole time. You high-five people you never met before. And watching the people around you is almost as entertaining as the game on the field. Now, I'm not sure I'd call it family-friendly, but it was an experience. It led to a lot of conversations later with my daughter. And as my neighbor in Portland observed about that crowd, he said, it's like a religion with all these people crazy about their team. I mean, why is it that 70,000 people who pay too much for a ticket gather into a football stadium when it's really cold to watch a bunch of spoiled millionaires move a leather air-filled ball down the field across the line before getting knocked down? Why do they do it? Because they are passionate about their team. And I am as crazy and as passionate as anyone. But I wonder, is that kind of passion missing today in the church? Is it missing here? Do we lack such passion in serving the King of Kings? Oh, may passion for him break loose at EBC like never before. We can't stir it up. We can't manufacture it. We can't create it. It has to happen. Nehemiah knew what it was that God put in his heart to do. And because of that, no amount of waiting would squelch it. We've seen his relaxation. We've seen his motivation. There's a third word here. It's the word investigation. Investigation. After Nehemiah sharpened his axe, verse 12, look at verse 12. He says, I set out during the night with a few men. You see, Nehemiah doesn't want to draw a lot of attention to what he's about to do. He doesn't want to enter in a parade, and so he goes quietly. He goes secretly, and the end of verse 12 says, there were no mounts or mules with me except the one I was riding on. See, Nehemiah here is about to do his own investigation in order to take in the extent of the problem. God had put it in his heart to go to Jerusalem based on what he heard from Hananiah back in chapter 1. But Nehemiah investigates the situation for himself. He does some due diligence. And really, in engineer-type fashion, he conducts this investigation methodically. Look what he says in verse 13. Follow along verse 13. He says, by night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate. Where do you live? Over by the dung gate. I'm guessing that's just not prime real estate. It's just a guess. But why is Nehemiah taking the time to travel about the ruins? Well, middle of verse 13 informs us that he's examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then verse 14, then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. There's so much rubble, he can't even get through it. That's not going to stop Nehemiah. He finds another way, and he says in verse 15, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Now, I love Nehemiah's approach here. He heard the city was in ruins, but he takes the time to get firsthand information. He checks it out for himself. Nehemiah does his homework. Now, I find a principle here for us. I don't think it's a stretch at all. In our day of social media, we hear a lot of just juicy stories. The rumor mill among Christian circles travels quite fast. Will you do me a favor? Don't accept everything you hear. Can we apply that, please? Many Christians have jumped on a bandwagon built on hearsay. Do your homework. Look into it before passing it on if you feel you must. Nehemiah takes the time to assess the needs so that when he speaks to the problem, he is well informed. It's not they said or, hearsay, firsthand. More importantly, he walks along the walls in order to get a firsthand look at the situation so that he can determine what needs to be done.